I call this debate to order. The resolution on the table tonight is resolved: abolish the Electoral College. I am now looking for a first speech in the affirmative. For that, I would like to go to Jean. Jean, you have 4 minutes.
Hey, Jesse, thank you very much. Hi, I'm Jean Widener. I'm coming to you tonight from San Diego, and I want to thank Braver Angels for this opportunity to express my opinion about why I think it's important for our country's democracy to ditch the Electoral College. I want to start first, though, by admitting that I live in a very purple household. My husband voted for Trump twice. I voted for Clinton and Biden. We live in California part of the year, and then we spend most of our summers in Wyoming. Neither of us are registered with a political party, but we have our definite political leanings, although we've both supported candidates that are not necessarily part of our leanings. So my reason for doing that is I just want to reassure Braver Angels that what you're trying to achieve is possible. You can get somebody who disagrees with you politically and still live with them for almost 50 years and still get along. But right now, because Braver Angels is a nonpartisan organization, the point I want to make about the Electoral College is I'd like to address the argument, which many believe, that the Electoral College is a partisan issue. However, it's not. Even though the Electoral College has benefited the Republican Party in the last 25 years, twice, it almost wasn't the case in 2004. In that presidential election, John Kerry lost the popular vote by more than 3 million votes. However, if he had just received 2% more votes in one state, Ohio, he would have earned their 20 electoral votes and the presidential election. So it was the Democratic Party that came very close to benefiting from the Electoral College in 2004. So I want to emphasize that I don't think this is a partisan issue. It's a democracy issue. One other point I want to make along the same lines is many of you may not realize which state granted the most votes to Trump during the 2020 election. It wasn't Florida. It wasn't Texas. It was California, where I live. More than 6 million Republican voters in my state here had their votes nullified because of the Electoral College. So again, I think it's a democracy issue. The Electoral College violates the principle of one person, one vote. And finally, having secure elections is also not a partisan issue. Yet it's the Electoral College itself that's the greatest danger to our election system. It's much easier to manipulate votes in one or two so-called battleground states than it is to manipulate votes nationwide. So the ideas that I'm espousing here actually came from the fact that I joined the League of Women Voters several years ago. Before that, I really didn't have a strong opinion on this issue. But they endorsed the abolishment of the Electoral College for more than 50 years. And
You have 30 seconds, Jean.
They researched and studied the issue on this problem, and it's their work which I have come to agree with.
Thank you to our speaker. And I will now look for questions for our speaker. If you have a question, please raise your Zoom hand. Let's go to Phil. A question for our speaker. Please unmute yourself, Phil.
Okay. Yes, Madam Chair, I would like to direct the following question to the speaker.
Mm-hmm.
If the speaker feels that the Electoral College is detrimental to democracy. What does she propose as a replacement for that?
I believe that our president should be elected by popular vote. We used to have a system where our senators were elected by an electoral system, and that was abolished with the 17th Amendment. And I believe that it is much more democratic for popular vote to elect our president as well.
Question from Alan. Alan, please unmute and ask your question.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, I'd like to know, Madam Chair, I'd like to know if the first speaker could describe some of the rationale or reasons behind the League of Women Voters position that she described.
Well, we are we're a nonpartisan organization, but we are pro-democracy, and that is what underlies our very mission. And we believe that the principle of one person, one vote is what should be driving all of our elections. But with the Electoral College, Wyoming, one of my favorite states where I live most of the time in the summertime, actually has a 1,000-time advantage over California because of the fact that they have a very low population, but they have 3 electors, whereas the population in California has to be split between 54 electors. So we believe that it violates the one person, one vote principle.
Thank you.
And for our final question for this speaker, Carrie.
Could you unmute yourself, Carrie?
My question for the speaker, I'm not that, I probably should have done my homework before watching this debate. Sorry about that, but I don't understand the point of having electors. I know it has something to do with low population states being represented, but I don't know if it's up to the speaker to answer this or if I should just do my own homework and have someone else ask a question.
Well, it is in our Constitution, just like it was mentioned in the video that was shown previously. It was a compromise, actually, between some of the southern states and the northern states. The southern states had a lower population than the northern states, and they felt that they would not be represented equally when they elected their president. So it came as a part of a compromise that they would, first of all, the slaves in those states would be counted as 3/5 of a person, and that would actually add to their representation. And then their representatives would all be part of the Electoral College.
The chair, go ahead.
They were concerned that pure democracy might lead to mob rule. And they felt that if the people's votes were given to elected officials, that it would be a safer compromise in selecting our president.
Thank you.
Thank you. The chair does smile with gratitude on speakers who give as much as I said about devil's advocacy, entertaining the other side and explaining it is very much smiled upon. So with that, our speaker and our questioners are thanked.
Thank you.
I am now looking for our first speech in the negative. And for that, I would like to go to Terry. Terry.
Hello.
Go ahead. You have 4 minutes.
Well, I live in Kansas. I got here by way of California, Michigan, and Ohio. Been here for about 20 years. Abolish the Electoral College. Short answer, no. I haven't done any research on the topic. I'm just sharing my individual thoughts. Never really thought about it too much before. This is the United States of America. Some have suggested the name of our nation be changed to simply America. I believe that idea is a component of the call to eliminate the Electoral College. I believe that the country's founders chose the United States as the name for a reason. Each state, large or small, has equal representation in the U.S. Senate, 2 senators, This reflects the fact that the USA is a constitutional republic, not a democracy, not a pure democracy, which, while deploying democratic processes at some levels, at the national level, the majority of the citizenry does not always have the final word on important issues. As a legislative balance, in order to recognize the popular vote, the U.S. House of Representatives is comprised of representatives in proportion to their number of citizens. That design comprises the nature of our republic intended by those who wrote the U.S. Constitution. The U.S. Supreme Court membership requires the agreement of the executive branch and the U.S. Senate, both, in order to appoint a judge. Thinking about the executive branch with president as its head, it is a massive, and the executive branch is a massive entity with the president at the top. The military, major departments such as the Interior, Education, Transportation, and more, the Center for Disease Control, the IRS, the CIA, International Relations, the Secretary of State, and heaven knows how many other departments. So the executive branch, which has authority over a bureaucracy of unimaginable power and influence, has over the decades spawned what can justifiably be referred to as the swamp. The swamp pretty much stays intact no matter the party of the president and the appointed cabinet members. The swamp is stagnant across presidential administrations. I feel certain that the U.S. would inevitably move in the direction of favoring its citizens in urban and suburban areas over the interest of rural citizens. Given the undeniable decline in the quality of life in many large cities, the consequences of such policies focusing on cities would be ill-advised, in my opinion. There's a natural order that limits the concentration and size of societies, just like in beehives, which spontaneously produce an extra queen, which leads to an exodus from the hive by a large number of members, known as swarming. Rome collapsed. Many of our cities are losing residents. Giving more power to citizens in those areas would lead to unintended and likely detrimental developments, in my opinion.
30 seconds left,
What-
Terry.
Wow. Okay. Well, anyway, in short, what is the United States? The United States is the Constitution of the United States. It says we're a republic, not a democracy. Thank you.
Thank you to our speaker. I see Michael's hand raised for our first question. Please unmute and ask your question to me.
Madam Chair, I'd like to know if the speaker thinks the current way the Electoral College is deployed is constitutional.
Well, it is modeled directly after the Senate and the House of Representatives, which is dominated by the House of Representatives. And it's definitely constitutional because it's written into the Constitution. I have the reference in the Constitution right here. So it's got to be constitutional if it's in the Constitution.
Let's go to SAS. Please unmute and ask your question to me.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm wondering if the speaker believes that a constitutional republic is a type or kind of democracy.
That depends on the individual design of the constitutional republic. As I said earlier, what the Constitution takes into consideration is the proportions of the citizenry, just like the U.S. Congress. So you call if you don't believe that the U.S. Congress is represented democratically, then I guess you wouldn't believe that the Electoral College is either.
And for our final question for the speaker, Kathy.
Yes, Madam Chair, I would like to ask if the speaker is aware that the House of Representatives in 1929, it was said the Permanent Apportionment Act was passed, where the maximum number of representatives in a state was set at 435. Therefore, California has 435, but as the state's populations have increased, there's not necessarily been a proportionate increase in the number of House of Representatives seats.
I didn't know that, and I don't mind.
And with that, our speaker and our questioners are thanked. If I don't get to you, I will remember who I don't get to, and you will be first up on my list next time. So thank you to all of our questioners. Now looking for another speech in the affirmative. And for that, we will go to Sass. Sass, please unmute, and you have 4 minutes.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Sass. I am a board director and the deputy director for the Equal Vote Coalition. I'm a board director for Democracy Without Elections. I volunteer for other voting method reform and good government organizations like the Center for Election Science. Utah approves, California approves. It's my full-time profession. I am not on the clock right now, though. I am here on my own time because I do feel I have something to contribute, but it is my full-time profession, both to research and advocate for reforms in this space. In practice, what the Electoral College is doing today, it is in terms of determining who wins the presidential race, it focuses all of the power into a random selection of swing states with at least a moderate number of Electoral College votes. So it's not big states like California, it's not small states like Wyoming. They're all irrelevant because in practice, we know how their votes are going to go, and they're not going to swing. So that's what happens in practice. I don't find that democratic. I also don't find it to be a reasonable part of a constitutional republic, and it's not the intent of the founding fathers. The intent of the founding fathers was to protect small states, which I think is reasonable. On the question of should we abolish the Electoral College, I think the answer is yes. But as a well-put question earlier said is, well, so then what do we replace it with? That's a critically important question that we have to ask when we talk in the affirmative about abolishing the Electoral College. Now, the natural or typical response to that is national popular vote. And even if we were to use a good voting method like star voting or ranked robin or approval voting, many of you have probably heard of none of those. That's okay. Not ranked choice voting. Ranked choice voting is a really terrible voting method. That's a separate issue. Won't get into that. But even if we were using a good voting method that did mathematically guarantee that every single voter had equal vote power in the math of the method, you would run into a problem that the previous speaker had mentioned. Although I'm gonna define it a little bit differently or approach it at a different angle, which is that campaigning is more efficient in areas of high population density. And we see a very strong correlation between people who choose to live in high population density areas and their political leanings and opinions and voting. And so what that means is that if we were to have a national popular vote, even with a good voting method, because of the efficiency gains in campaigning, that would bias the elections in favor of candidates who appeal to voters in high population density areas. And we know from practice that some policies that work well in cities don't work well in rural areas. It's not one-to-one. And that's like a really very real fear that I would have if we had a national popular vote, is that we would leave a lot of rural voters behind and we would not be taking care of their needs and we would not be accurately representing them. So when talking about this, we just need to be cognizant of that factor, which I think is often, I won't even say ignored because I think most people aren't aware of it. And so I want to bring that to the attention of everybody. I've heard many alternate different proposals. None of them have really fully done the trick for me. One idea I kind of like, and I'm running low on time here, is you would still have the same number of votes like an electoral college style, but instead of having this extra set of like electors, you would do a lottery selection from state legislatures, but they would still send the same number of representatives as what the electoral college does. So not from federal representatives, but from state representatives, and it can help voters to focus more on their state legislatures. I'm not fully sold on that. I'm still considering it, but it's just one option. There's a lot that needs to be considered. So that should be my 4 minutes, but
Yep.
thank you.
Thank you for that. The chair is grateful when people argue in the affirmative, but then offer pass forward. Congratulations on doing that. And now let's go to some questions. Zachary, please unmute and ask your question to me.
Hi, yeah, I think one question is, you know, when we talk about the problem with the Electoral College, we talk about the winner take all system, which is when a state gives all of the delegates to whoever wins the vote there. You mentioned at the beginning, Nebraska and Maine don't do that. My question is this a more viable solution that we can transition to, that the states eliminate the winner take all model and do proportional allocation of their delegates?
Thank you. The answer to that is no. The reason that 48 states attribute all of their electors to a single candidate is because that is in that state's best interest strategically. It has the highest chance of getting a presidential candidate interested in campaigning in that state, because campaigning in their state may mean that instead of only winning one electoral vote for all that effort, they might win 3 or 10 or 15 or 20 or 40 or 50. And so that just it just breaks a lot of the incentives and structures, and that would also require a constitutional amendment. The U.S. Supreme Court has upheld multiple times that states are free to choose how to assign their electoral votes however they want. And so if we're already doing a constitutional amendment, I think a more comprehensive solution that ensures inclusivity of all Americans should be the approach. It's a great question, though.
Evelyn, unmute and ask your question to me, please.
Hi there. I really appreciate Sass's comments, but I was concerned when he said, he seemed to be objecting to the idea that there would be swing states, they said that we know how California and I don't remember whether it was Montana or Wyoming are going to vote. And I wondered if there was any problem with knowing how they're going to vote, and that swing states, we should expect them to be powerful because we don't know how they're going to vote. And perhaps that's a better reflection of, you know, the overall demographic of voters across the whole nation, that there is a swing. Because I myself don't vote by party. And I know I'm not alone in that. I've lived in different parts of the US. So I would just appreciate your comment. And if I've misunderstood your comment about the swing states, just correct me, but thank you so much.
To our speaker.
Thank you. Yeah, that's actually a really good point. And I would allude to that 2004 election that was talked about earlier, where, you know, just a handful more voters in Ohio could have swung in favor of Democrats, and Democrats tend to be in higher population density areas. It hasn't happened, but it totally could happen. And so knowing that we've had it fail in the direction of conservatives, and we've very nearly had it fail in the direction of progressive or liberals or whatever word you would like to use, left-leaning, tells us that these swing states are not giving us an accurate reflection.
But why is that a failure? I don't understand why it's a failure if it goes one way. I don't understand that concept. I apologize, but I did understand that.
Yeah. So I guess maybe I would say specifically a failure in direction of the left, actually. I wouldn't even say direction of the right. The reason is because, like I said, you have this bias in that the efficiency of campaigning in high population density areas. And so if you were to have a candidate with a lower popular vote than the right-leaning candidate, but still win because of the Electoral College, because of what the swing states did, that would only amplify that bias in favor of campaigning to high population density or urban voters. You know, and still ultimately, though, which states are swing states is mostly random. It changes over time. And this is a very vast, diverse country. It's a diverse country, and there's lots of pockets of homogeneity, and so you could end up very easily with entire sections, swaths of the country that are just unrepresented entirely, because they're either in a deep red or deep blue state, and there don't happen to be any swing states in that area. But there's a very, very good point that I've not heard before, and it's something I'm definitely going to reflect on more. So I really appreciate that.
And for a final question for this speaker, let's go to Jim.
This is a rather broad question that I would need to ask. This speaker can answer, or someone else. What does it take to change the system? Would there be a constitutional amendment, and then in other words, all the states would have to vote? What's the process?
Yeah, so I do have that knowledge. So the kind of simple answer is a constitutional amendment, which would require 2/3 of both houses of Congress and 38 or 3/4 of states to ratify. But there's another approach that is currently being tried. It's called the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. As I stated earlier, states are allowed to just decide how they want to assign their electoral college votes. And so you can get enough states together to say, well, we know that we collectively have at least a majority of electoral college votes. We are just going to collectively assign them to whoever wins the national popular vote countrywide once we reach that size of coalition. And they're getting there. It's hard to say whether they'll ever actually reach that. Again, there are problems with that. It doesn't address the voting method that's being used. It doesn't address the efficiency of campaigning. It's not future-proof for different voting methods. There's various different voting methods being adopted all across the country and repealed and banned, the whole thing. I'm working on efforts to try to have a sister compact to help prepare for that. And so that's like another way that you could kind of circumvent it. Or you could have a different type of interstate compact. So interstate compact meaning a bunch of states together across state lines getting an agreement. That's what they mean by compact. Whether or not they're allowed to have that compact is like debatable. We don't really know. There's like arguments on both sides, but that's kind of also the point, is they want to trigger that conversation. So that's kind of a sneaky way to subvert the Electoral College to kind of kneecap itself. So those are kind of the two ways that I would be aware of that you could really achieve that outside of some kind of violent revolution. Another one would be a constitutional convention
Let's
done by the states.
Yep. Thank you so much.
But there's a third mechanism in the Constitution that allows states to do a constitutional amendment without Congress.
All right. Our speaker and our questioners are thanked. I would like to just interject here something that happens when we have really expert speakers. People who don't feel like they're experts get a little bit shy. So I want all of you in the audience who might be feeling that way right now. I also will welcome speeches on your own experience. Do you live in a swing state? Do you live in a state where it never swings? So your personal stories are just as relevant as expertise. I appreciate that, Sass. Bringing in all that knowledge. I know that our audience wants that. So think about that. Think about that.
Jesse, can we discuss that question after we finish?
Yeah, please.
On experts.
Okay.
I should have sent that to my my whip.
Send your questions to the whips. So with that, think about your speeches. Reach out to the whips if you want to speak. And with that, I am now looking for another speech in the negative. And for that, we're going to go to Meg. Meg, you have 4 minutes. Please unmute yourself.
Good evening. Thank you, everyone, for being here. It's been a pleasure to listen to the other points of view. If you are familiar at all with the constitutional amendments and how many have tried to come into Congress to change the Electoral College, it's in the hundreds. Like I'm saying 500 to 600 times we've tried to change the Constitution and get rid of or modify the Electoral College. Nothing has passed. And I also want everybody to think back to the video at the beginning, because that number of 538 is what I really want to focus on. We have 100 senators, 2 in each state, and then we have 438 representatives in the 50 states at varying levels. I live in South Carolina. We register to vote, but not by party. I consider myself a political junkie because I love the process. So in my state, I have 9 congressional districts and 2 senators for a total of, 7 congressional districts and 2 senators for a total of 9 electoral votes. So when the video ran at the beginning, it talked about 2 states, Maine and Nebraska, that do not award all of their electors winner take all. And I wanted to go through the process a little bit and try and help everybody understand why this might make a little more sense of going with one of the question askers where, why can't we do a more of a proportional thing for all states? And wouldn't that help represent all of the popular vote in that states? And that's where I'm coming from. I believe that's possible. So in Nebraska, you have 2 senators. You also have 3 congressional districts for a total of 5. In Maine, you have 2 senators and 2 congressional districts. So the way it works in those 2 states, when it comes time for the process of the Electoral College to kick in, and it's a process, it's not a place, it's a process, it's part of the Constitution. When that process kicks in the proportionally allocated states of Maine and Nebraska, whoever wins the popular vote gets 2 electors, which I'm going to say, let's call those the electors that represent our senators, just to kind of get them over on the side here. So now Nebraska has 3 congressional districts to allocate, and Maine has 2 congressional districts to allocate. And I'm just going to go through 2 districts in those 2 states. Let's say that candidate A in District 1 gets 70% of the vote, candidate B gets 30% of the vote. Then in that district, the elector would go to the 70% candidate A. If in the 2nd congressional district, candidate A gets 40% of the vote and candidate B gets 60% of the vote, then in that 2nd congressional district, that electoral vote is going to go to candidate B. With 48 states doing winner take all, and let's definitely think about those big states with a lot of electors like California and Texas and Florida that have way more than Maine and Nebraska put together. It is going back to some of those close elections where the popular vote probably didn't do as much as it could to elect the president. Why is that? Well, you know, the founding fathers thought it would be really great. First of all, let's let Congress pick the president. Let's not let a bunch of uneducated people pick who the president is going to be and who's going to lead our country. And I think that was kind of one of their mindsets when they were setting the Constitution. So I think if we could go to proportional allocation for all the states like Maine and Nebraska, we would have a better electoral college, because I'm not sure it can be abolished.
All right, questions for our speaker. Please raise your Zoom hand. Let's go to Luke.
Hi, I have a pretty direct question, actually. I'm just curious if the speaker is aware of any organizations that are actually trying to implement this, because I think it's a pretty interesting idea.
Well, not by name, Luke, but I can tell you that in my state, they have our legislative term is a 2-year term. It starts in January of 1 year, goes to June, then they're off from July to December, and then they start again in the 2nd year. So they get in 12 months of legislation over a 2-year period. They currently have a House bill that says that they want to establish it as a proportional thing, and they're making it available so that states could opt to join into that in their own state. And I think I heard Sass say earlier that there is that mechanism for states to decide how they would have that done separate from the Constitution. And I would have to get with Sass on that, because he sounds like a bit of more of an expert than I am.
Let's go now to Michelle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question for the speaker is, does she think or have any evidence that a proportional allocation of such as what you described would help overcome the 2-party lock on our electoral process and enable other candidates to have a toehold in the race? Thank you.
I think that historically, as most of us know, America is considered a two-party system. We certainly do have third parties that are out there doing things. And I think that some people look at those as spoiler candidates that don't help a major party candidate win or lose. I think it could be beneficial to any party to help proportionally allocate the electoral votes so that each person is getting at least what they earned in popular vote or close to what they earned in popular vote. And I think it might be a more accurate. Now, will 270 be the magic number? I would hope not. I would think that they would have to look at that again and see what that magic number would be.
Let's go to Patrick for a question, please. Patrick, please unmute yourself.
Actually, I'm trying to get hold of my whip.
Oh, okay. Patrick, go ahead and send a chat message to your whip. If Patrick's whip could reach out to him, that would be great. And we will go now to Glenn.
Hi, I'd like to thank the speaker for an informative description of how Maine's and Nebraska's systems work. And if I understood right, she posed that as useful to make the electoral vote proportional to the popular vote. And I'm just wondering, how is that superior to direct election by popular vote? Because the popular vote by definition is proportional to the popular vote.
It is.
Thank
I
you.
love a proportional vote. Love a proportional vote, Glenn. But guess what? The Constitution is nixing the popular vote. And because 500 or more times we've tried to change the Constitution to either abolish or repeal or revise the Electoral College, and none of those have passed, I'm saying this might be a faster way to see some change in that area.
I see. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, our speaker and our questioners are thanked. Now I am looking for another speech in the affirmative. For that, I would like to go to Kathy. Kathy, if you would still like to give a speech, please unmute. You have 4 minutes.
Yes, I am concerned, and I would like to see the Electoral College abolished because, as I understand it, and it was even spoken here, I think in the first speech, the Electoral College was originally thought to be a compromise between slave states and free states, or that a way that all areas of the country could be, the interests of different areas could be equally represented. And I'd like to say that it seems that as it is currently being implemented, it is doing the exact opposite of what the founders intended. If they wanted all areas to be represented, now it seems it's only the swing states that are really making the final decision, and those states are not necessarily representative of the entire country. Certainly wouldn't be Pennsylvania or Arizona, wouldn't be representative of where I live in Missouri. And so it concerns me that it is not fulfilling what the founders intended. And in addition to that, I think that as currently implemented with, say, a blue state like California or New York, where we know almost without an election they're going to go blue, and those electoral votes will go toward the Democratic candidate. People in those states can feel their vote doesn't really even count very much. As an example, my son, who lived in New York, and his home state was Missouri, he didn't register in New York. He kept voting. It wasn't really legal, but he kept voting in Missouri absentee because he thought at that time that it was a state that would count more. Now it's strictly a red state, but at the time it was purple and more of a swing state. And that's about all I have to say.
Thank you to our speaker. As a resident of a very solid state from a swing state, I sympathize with the speaker's son. So with that, questions for our speaker. Please raise your Zoom hand if you've got a question. I see no questions for our speaker. I'm going to hesitate here just a little bit in case anyone would like to. Jim, a question for our speaker.
Well, just another example. I live in Tennessee. There's no reason for a Democratic candidate to try and campaign here. We know it's going to go red, so I don't feel represented.
And how does our speaker think about that?
Jim, I believe his name was. Jim, I grew up in Tennessee. I'm born in Nashville.
Remember to address me, the speakers.
Oh, sorry.
I'm not
Madam
catching
Chair.
it. I need to catch it.
Madam Chair, I'd like the questioner to know that I was born in Nashville, grew up in Memphis, and I understand the concerns of that state. And in Missouri, I feel the same way. I feel the same way, is that my state is not in play. No, we have not had a federal election group here since 2008.
Any further questions for this speaker? Going once, going twice. All right. In that case, I am now looking for an additional speech in the negative. And I believe we have up next, Jet, would you be willing to are you still interested in making a speech?
Yeah, I am against the eliminating Electoral College. Is that, you still want me to talk about it?
Absolutely. You have 4 minutes in the negative.
Okay. Well, Electoral College system is part of our Constitution, and it is, we are constitutional representative democracy. It is doing what exactly it was designed to do. Electoral College system was designed to provide representative voice to rural part of our country or farming part of our country. And it is doing just that. We are representing their voice, okay? Today, however, urban and rural areas are much more sharply divided and polarized, whereas obviously cities and urban area has more blue leaning, and farming and rural area has more red leaning, okay? System is working, whether you like it or not. That's the way how Constitution was designed about 250 years ago. And it's doing just as what our founders had wanted to do. Therefore, unless we decide to change our Constitution and make our country to be pure democracy, I say that we should keep the Electoral College system we have. Don't be yeah, we are losing, so therefore let's make a change now. Our Constitution worked for 250 years, and we should continue on. If we decide to have a constitutional convention and change the Constitution, what if rural people or farming people said, wait a minute, why do we have to represent our country representation by population? Why not change that to landmass size? Okay, if we were to do that, Montana, which has about 40 times less population than California, they have about same size landmass. So they would have the same representation as California. And I don't think you want to do that, okay? Our Constitution, representative democracy, lasted for 250 years. I think it is doing exactly what is intended to be by our founders, and I think we should keep it that way. Thank you.
Thank you to our speaker. And now for our first question, let's go to Risa. Am I saying your name right?
It's, yeah, close, Risa. Thank you.
Risa.
Yes. I'm wondering if the speaker believes that the amendments we have are something that we should continue to do. Because from what I can see, we have amendments because what was created at the beginning wasn't perfect. And in fact, as we know, slavery was allowed, people owning people was allowed in the beginning of ours. And that's why the Electoral College and the slaves who could not actually vote were created as part people. So I'm wondering if the speaker believes in amending and continuing the amendment process. And so therefore, making an amendment to the Electoral College could be appropriate.
Yes, Madam Speaker, Yes,
Madam Chair.
constitutional amendment is certainly a process by changing the electoral college system. Yes, it is. It is a part of the Constitution. That is possible way. But I expect that would be very difficult to do because it requires a 2/3 approval by the states and state representatives and senators. But that is certainly a process. It could be done. It could be one way of doing it.
For another question, let's go to Ken. Please unmute and ask your question to me.
Hello, Madam Chair. I guess my question for the speaker would be, he seems to be passionate and believe that he knows what the founders intended when they made the decision. But it's giving a unfair, unbalanced weight to those more rural areas than other places. I mean, California has 39 million. I think the smallest state has 600,000 or so. Yet each of those states is represented by 2 senators. So there's already a system of checks and balances to kind of take into account that no state should feel smaller despite their population. So yeah, I just think, I just wonder how the speaker feels, why he believes that the rural voters' voice politically should mean any more than those who live in suburbs or cities.
Madam Speaker, could I respond?
Chair, yes.
Very good question. And I certainly understand representation. However, our founding fathers thought exactly that. They felt, I believe that they felt the rural area with the less population should have equal amount or right amount of representation in a government. They recognize, yes, that there will be difference in opinion, difference in political view from rural area versus city. They intended to be this way, exactly the way how it is working. Yes, there are less population in Montana than California, but Montana people represent certain point of view. They want to make sure they get the proper point of view, because after all, they may be more rural farming area. They may have a different opinion than people in California. They wanted to give right amount of voice to the rural people, and it is doing just the way it is.
And for our final question for this speaker, let's go to Janice. Yeah, Janice, are you there? Not there. Let's go to Patricia, and Janice, we will come back to you.
Thank you. I live in California in a rural area, and our district, our congressional district, has 60% of Republican. So this county, or our district, I should say, is frequently not part of the electoral federal elections. Okay, so I realize that it's very difficult to be fair to everybody always. I think at the end of the day, the semantics about a republic versus a democracy, we need a deep dive into that conversation, because I've tried to get the distinction.
This is sounding like a speech. Can you bring it to a question?
Okay, thank you. I'll get to the question. I appreciate that. What does this speaker think of republic versus democracy? What is the difference? Is it semantics, or is there real difference?
Thank you to our questioner and to our speaker.
Well, what difference is that we are what we call representative democracy, meaning that it is not one vote for each individual, but we have a representation based on how many people voted in their state. The representative will vote based on their populist votes. So that's what we are, representative democracy, not a pure democracy. So I hope that answers your question. And Patricia, I feel bad for you. 60% of your
address to me,
county
please.
not being represented properly.
All right. Thank you very much. Our speaker and questioners are thanked. Now, before we go on to our next speakers, and I want to remind everyone, if you want to speak, chat to your whips. We do have some people lined up, and that is how you get on tap. So, but we're going to do a little bit of a 7th inning stretch right now, and we have some poll questions for you, just to pause. And so I'm going to turn it over to our Zoom whip. Alethea, can you get those poll questions up? We'll give you 1 minute, 90 seconds reading this question. Reflecting on your viewpoint entering this debate, do you think the Electoral College is more or less of a threat than you did before you began participating tonight? Go ahead and answer that, and we'll give you a minute. This is a good time also if you need to run and use the bathroom. We will be taking about a 3-minute break right now with a couple poll questions. So. We are a tough crowd for any Electoral College supporters tonight. Give it.
Did the question disappear? I didn't get it.
Yeah, it wasn't done yet.
Did it disappear?
Yes,
yeah.
and I haven't.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to. I read the whole thing through and it just disappeared.
I am sorry about that.
Also, I think the last 2 choices on question number 2, I think one should have said I would or would not. It was duplicated. Both said I would recommend Braver Angels, and might want to check that.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, we're trying something new here, so bear with us. Thank you.
I need it back up though. Are you going to put it back up or not?
They'll get it. They'll get it.
Okay.
All right, here it is. We're gonna have you re-vote. We've lost the results. So go ahead and re-vote. It is up now. Thank you. Thanks, Alethea. And the second question.
For the second question, those last 2 answers are different. Take a closer look. One says I would recommend Braver Angels. The other says I would recommend Braver Angels debates to my friends, family, neighbors, etc.
Thank you, Natalie.
And the second question, you can choose multiple. You can check multiple boxes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll give you just another 30 seconds. I'm happy to hear a lot of you are seeing something that you had not, hearing something that you hadn't previously considered. Thank you for the recommendations. That means a lot to us, of course. And, all right, 10 seconds left. Okay, Alethea, do you want to go ahead and end the poll? Looks like we have, can everyone see the results? I know what I can see.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, very good. So I'm very happy that you're hearing things you hadn't previously considered, understanding other viewpoints. This is great. This is very encouraging. Thank you for your feedback to us. And all right, we know we never take a vote on who wins or loses these debates. This is as close as you're ever going to see us get. We know that people are not changing their views in most of these things, but I am glad to hear that some of you are shifting a little bit. That's always encouraging that we've given you some stuff to think about. So thank you for taking our poll. If you have any further thoughts, reach out to us, debates@braverangels.org. We always love to know what you think. And with that, this concludes our stretch break and our poll. Thanks, Alethea. I am now looking for a speech in the affirmative, and we are going to go to Zachary. Zachary, if you are still interested in giving a speech, we're going to go to 3-minute speeches now. So we're coming to the end.
Great, thank you. Well, I just wanted to put on the table of things that I'm not sure we said explicitly, which is one of the things that the problem with the Electoral College is it makes millions of votes not count. Millions of votes not count. And so I live in California. it doesn't matter who I vote for. It doesn't matter whether I vote at all. And that's a problem in all these in states all over the country. And then, of course, we've heard tonight people saying things like, "Oh, we're trying to be electoral colleges to make it representative so everybody has a voice." It's doing the opposite, as someone previously mentioned, in the sense that the elections are decided by Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. And I think Sass earlier had mentioned that we wouldn't change our system because it would be inefficient for candidates to have to campaign all over the country. No, we want the candidates campaign all over the country. We want them to be accountable to everybody in Virginia and Kentucky, Florida, and South Dakota, and everywhere. They have to, their message has to reach everybody and to convince everybody. So I think the Electoral College is a serious problem for our democracy. And one of the things I'm hearing also is we talk about the founders a lot. The founders, as if they had some kind of revelation from God. Honestly, we all know that they didn't. The founders themselves made amendments. In 1804, they changed some of the 12th Amendment changed some of the rules around the Electoral College. So this idea that the founders had this infallible way of building a government doesn't really make any sense. And then ask yourself, what other countries in the world use an Electoral College to establish who's the president of their country? Look it up. It's like Estonia and the Micronesia and Burundi. Nobody else, no other major democracies are using Electoral College for good reason. And our so-called perfect, amazing democracy, as we often praise ourselves for, people aren't copying it around the world. They're coming up with their own constitutions. They're not copying ours for good reason. And the Electoral College is a perfect example of that. They made the compromise to give 2 senators to each state. That did the job enough. That's a huge win for these rural areas, that they get 2 senators, and California or Texas, everybody gets 2. So to have it also be in the presidential race, it's been a disaster. We have this 2-party system. It's totally locked up. No third party will ever climb out of this mess. I'm affirmative to abolish it, but I think earlier we talked about the idea of more states taking on the proportional representation, and I think that's a more sensible thing to move towards. A lot of states would be happy to do what Nebraska and Maine do. Just say, this is more representative of a real democracy. We're going to allocate our delegates according to how people vote. I want the Republicans in my state. I want the Democrats in my state. I want the Green Party in my state. Everybody's vote to count and to show up in the results at the end of the day. So I would say affirmative for abolishing the Electoral College, but probably the most viable way to do it is to keep it and have states take on the proportional representation model like Nebraska and Maine do. That would not require a constitutional amendment. It would require, like as was said earlier, the states can choose what they do. So they could choose to do that.
Thank you to our speaker. Let's go for questions. We will go to Claire and then Evelyn. Claire, please unmute and ask a question to me.
Yes, I'd like to know what the speaker thinks would be the effect on voter turnout and overall participation in our political process if we had either of those options, proportional representation or abolishment of the Electoral College. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it would dramatically increase voter turnout. I just had a conversation with somebody today that said, I'm not going to vote. It doesn't matter. I'm in California. My vote doesn't matter. Of course, I told them, well, you need to vote for your school board president and your counter supervisors and the local issues. But yeah, it would dramatically increase voter turnout. And the message of everybody must vote, your vote counts, that would actually have some weight. When people say that in these, TV commercials and whatnot, it's actually not true. Sadly, it's not true that every vote counts. So it would dramatically increase voter turnout because people could genuinely say that.
Thank you. Let's go to Evelyn.
Hello, Ms. Chairman. I was wondering if the speaker thought that having the candidates to campaign everywhere would really help anything. But for me, it raises a different question that I'd love to see a debate on. And that is, how should we fund these elections? Because they're just so ridiculously expensive. And I'm interested in comments and more discussion.
To our speaker on funding.
Yeah, I mean, the question around candidates campaigning everywhere, I mean, one of the problems with our democracy is how large our country is. This is just a fundamental issue. How do you represent such a diverse geographic area, so many different types of landscapes, political landscapes and whatnot. So they would have to make an appeal, as they do now through media, which is, we know what all these candidates are saying. I'm not sure what percentage of people in this group have even been to one of these campaign rallies. Probably only 10% or something. We've seen what they say on TV. We see what they say on the web. That's how we're getting their information. So it wouldn't be they would just have to appeal to the whole country. They don't need to travel to every single town. As far as funding for campaigns, I mean, that is a serious problem that needs to be addressed probably in another Braver Angels discussion, is how do we change this model where the one with the most money wins? That's not democracy either, obviously. So yeah, that's a separate issue. I think it's a serious problem.
Money in politics would certainly be a good topic for a future debate. Now, unless any of you are from, hold on a second. So unless any of you are from Estonia or Burundi and want to defend those systems, then I'm going to take one more question from CC. Unmute, please, and ask your question to me.
Yes, Madam Chair, I'd like to ask the speaker, having also just lived in New York and Los Angeles and feeling like my vote doesn't count, but knowing that the population of Los Angeles and New York is greater than 28 states, how do we just go to popular vote? Because the only democracy that I know of that actually does a pure popular vote is the Philippines. And most other democracies have a parliamentary procedure where they only elect a party, not the head of state.
Yeah, well, I mean, this issue of there being more people in these urban areas and it slanting things, that's the founders talked a lot about that. That's why they did this thing with the 2 senators for each state. So I don't know if we need to do more to make sure that the people in where the most people are has less say. I mean, just the concept of more people, more say is a sound concept. There's nothing wrong with that concept, right? But we want to allow diversity of thought. We want, you know, certain areas to, even though they're low populated, that they do have the influence. So yeah, there's the Electoral College keeping it in some form. The delegate allocation, as we heard with Nebraska and Maine, it's their 2 senators and their congressional representatives. So they get the boost by the 2 senators within the Electoral College delegate counts, but the proportional representation would be according to how the state voted. So there's a few different ways you could do it. I mean, that's one way of doing it, is just going proportional. And you still have the boost for those areas with the senators that they were allocated.
Thank you to our speaker and to our questioners. So now I will be looking for another speech in the negative. Ken, are you still interested in giving a speech in the negative?
I am, Madam Chair.
You have 3 minutes.
Okay, I will do my best to read through here. Okay, so if the Electoral College was initially selected as a compromise to avoid having members of Congress select or elect the president, I'd prefer a revised version of the Electoral College as a 21st century solution to the present system. As a previous speaker mentioned, when conducting elections, we should strive to come as close as possible to the concept of one person, one vote. Unfortunately, the current system does the exact opposite due to the winner-take-all, winner-take-all system that is currently in place. As a result, whether a candidate wins a state by 1 percentage point or 20 percentage points, they receive all of the electoral votes for a state. As a result, a blue voter living in a red state or a red voter living in a blue state essentially has his or her vote invalidated. As a compromise solution to ensure that more states with smaller populations do not feel as though their desires are not being recognized, I believe a hybrid solution would be to keep the concept of the Electoral College by assigning electoral votes to a presidential candidate based upon his or her vote totals in each congressional district. The remaining 100 votes, 2 per state, would be allocated on a state-by-state basis to the candidate that receives the highest popular vote in the state. This change preserves the concept of the Electoral College, would hopefully make candidates work harder nationwide to earn votes and ensure that voters in a political minority within his or her state understands that their vote really does matter. As a side note, due to gerrymandering and attempts by state legislatures of both parties to put their thumb on the scale to create congressional districts that are favorable to their party, some type of oversight or consideration would need to be taken as well. Thank you.
Thank you to our speaker. Looking for questions. Please raise your hand. Annalisa, please unmute yourself.
Was that Annalisa?
Annalisa, yes,
Okay.
please.
I want to make sure I'm who you called on. I wanted to mention to the chair that I appreciate the speaker bringing up gerrymandering. And I also would just appreciate the speaker's comments on how the proposed solution might affect someone in my situation, which is a third-party voter and candidate in a red state. Thank you very much.
To our speaker.
Okay, Madam Speaker, Madam Chair, I would say in that case, honestly, I think it would be very difficult for a third-party candidate, especially at the national level, to be able to win an election. Not saying it's right, not saying it's wrong. I think it's just a reality. At the end of the day, the person needs to have a majority of the votes. So in this case here, I mean, yeah, you may get a majority of the votes in that congressional district or wherever they are, but do you have enough to cobble together the majority to win overall? So it does not solve that problem, Madam Chair.
And now we'll take one more question. I will be moving through a little faster to get all of our speeches in. So Zachary, please unmute and go forward with your question.
Yeah, that's an interesting proposal from Ken. I'm supposed to be seeking the chair, I guess, right? Go by congressional districts. I wonder if he has some thoughts on, if it's by congressional district, is there some sort of power within the congressperson who controls that district, that they have some influence over how the whole thing goes? Is there some problem there, perhaps? It's certainly more representative than what we have now, but I wonder if congressional district would be the way to go.
Madam Chair, in that case there, I mean, I speak to congressional district because that's still how the number of electors each state gets are divvied up. So the congressperson, whomever gets selected, really wouldn't have a say. However, the existing system is done now with people who are on the inside within the state they go off and make that vote. That could all still stay in place, but who that person is committed to and who they're supposed to support will be based upon what the will is of the voters that are in the district that they represent.
Our speaker and our questioner are thanked. Thank you very much. And now I am looking for another speech in the affirmative. For that, we have Robin lined up. Robin, you have 3 minutes. Please unmute and go ahead.
Thank you. I'm not greatly prepared, so please forgive my
We love off the cuff. The floor is
okay.
yours.
I think it's important to think about what we're trying to achieve as we come together as a society to form a government. And I would argue that there are two different goals that it's necessary to distinguish between. One is what is guaranteed to us by the Bill of Rights, that there are certain rights that everybody has, even if they're in the minority. The other is the greater good for the greatest number, so that if more Americans want to have more affordable housing, for example, that's something that the government pursues. I don't think this discussion has really reflected that. We've talked in terms of protecting the interests of the rural voter. And I would just say it's troubling to me that several speakers have seemed to be willing to write off the interests of the urban voter as if they're not as equal as the rural voters. The urban voters reflect the diversity of the United States much more accurately. They have economic woes, they have concerns about climate change, just like any voter anywhere. And to just say, well, we want to worry about whether the rural voters really their interests are protected, that really disenfranchises the urban voters. It's a zero-sum situation. When people talk about what the founders envisioned, let's not kid ourselves. When they said that they wanted small and rural states to have a bigger voice, they were talking about slave states. I don't know if that's a goal we still want to pursue. Ken brought up gerrymandering, or Zach, did I forget? I'm sorry. That's a really important point. If the House of Representatives is supposed to be where the popular vote manifests itself, that has been totally blocked by the institution of all the gerrymandering. Finally, I feel like it's been pretty clearly demonstrated over time that the populous states are disadvantaged to an extreme degree under our current system. There's a net outflow of revenue from populous states to less populous states. There is less representation in terms of getting projects allocated and grant money allocated to populous states. They just don't have as many representatives per person advocating for them. So I think that there's a real injustice being done, and we need to really think about what our goals are.
Thank you to our speaker for going for some of those zero-sum conflicts that we have to sort out. Let's take some questions. Carol, please unmute yourself.
Hi, so I had a question, Madam Speaker, for the last speaker. I'm originally from Montana, one of those rural states. And my question to her is, I live now in an urban state, so I understand that side of the issue that she was speaking to. But my question is, it's a long way down the list till you get to the highly populated states. When you're looking at the amount of land in rural states that's actually owned by the government. States like Alaska, for instance, are 95
This sounds a little
or
like a speech. Can you bring it to a question?
So the question is, how do you account for the fact that rural states are not represented with population because the government actually owns so much of the rural state land?
I would be interested to see an analysis of how that type of problem is reflected across the states. So, for example, I know that in my home state of Connecticut, the city of New Haven is very urban, not a well-off city. Part of their problem is that Yale owns so much of the city property and does not pay any taxes on it. So I'm wondering about the impact of other entities along with the federal government that own property that prevent it from being taxed or represented. I think that's a really interesting question.
And for one further question, let's go to Philip.
Yes, Madam Chair, I appreciated the perspective that the speaker just expressed. As you know, as we've been at this for an hour, one of the reflections I've gotten was the difference between the diversity of the urban environment and how that differs from the rural. So my question to the speaker is that congressional districts give enough of a physical boundary for the various groups to express their needs. Certainly in rural districts, it might. Not so certain in. I don't. That's a rambling question. Please take your best shot at my rambling.
To our speaker, take your best shot.
I would just say, as I said, I think gerrymandering has diluted the impact of the autonomy of each district, so that the people in each district can express their choices. I also think that the impact of a representative delegation compared to the Senate delegation is somewhat muted. And the fact that every state has 2 senators creates more of a disadvantage for populous states than the representatives create an advantage.
I see the additional question, but I am going to prioritize getting more speeches in. Forgive me, Zachary. But we're going to go on. We have 3 more speeches before we do our debrief tonight on the list. So with that, our speaker and our questioners are thanked, and I am now moving to, in the negative, Alvin. Alvin, are you still interested in giving a speech in the negative? Do we have Alvin? Perhaps we have lost him.
Looks like he's trying to unmute.
Oh, thank you.
Got his finger up.
Thank you. I cannot see him. There's juggling a lot of windows here with these online debates. So thank you for keeping me from moving on.
He's the guy on the beach.
Looking through for him. Alvin, whenever you're ready. Are we having some audio problems there?
Yeah, I think I finally got it. Sorry.
There we go.
I'm very new at this stuff.
No worries. 3 minutes.
I feel very strongly that looking historically at this problem, if you consider the fact that prior to 1776, the world was ruled by kings, czars, emperors, chiefs, and this was the really first time that men gathered to try to figure out how to form a government for the people. And obviously they were reaching a compromise. And I think what they accomplished was absolutely amazing. And we can't try to keep on redoing it every time we have a new whim. I also feel very strongly that if you went to straight voting, all the money and all the advertising and everything would go to the big cities, and everybody else would be totally forgotten. Lastly, historically, this actually goes back to before 1776. I'd like you to think about the frontier, when the frontiersmen were trying to protect themselves from the Indians, and the Quaker Philadelphians ran the cities, and they permitted the merchants to sell tomahawks, scalping knives, lead, and muskets to the Indians. And of course, they tried to stop them for a while. As a result of this, they succeeded for a while, but in the end, they ended up, the Quakers, merchants, succeeding. But the point I'm trying to get at is, as a result, the Pennsylvania Assembly then added counties, so that Philadelphia was not the only one, with Chester and Montgomery, I think, and Delaware. So they added counties to give the people out in the frontier representation. And that was a new way of looking at things, which has a bicameral system. So that system ended up going into our federal system, and it also ended up part of the Connecticut Compromise. So it was actually people trying to protect themselves from the Indians that led to, I think, this Electoral College is part of the solution.
Thank you to our speaker. I see, let's go to, we'll go to Ken and then Zachary. Ken, please go ahead.
Hello, Madam Chair. So I live in the Northern Virginia area. I'm a Washington Commanders fan. So I'm going to use an analogy to raise my question for the speaker, previous speaker. So there's a debate up here about whether or not it should be the Redskins or whether the team should change the name. And like I said, I've been a fan for many years. And my question to those who were against the name change was that if a brand new team were started today, would Redskins be a name that will be up for consideration? And I think the answer will be no. That would not even be one of the things on the list. So regardless of the tradition and history, you have to consider where we are now. So my question for the speaker is, knowing what we know now, do you believe, with the knowledge that we have, that if the country was stood up again present day, would the Electoral College system be the system that would be selected for selecting the president?
To our speaker.
Well, one, I do not think that that is a proper question, because we can't resolve every decision anew as a tabula rasa. We have to have a foundation on our decisions, and our foundation comes from our history. Without history, you're standing on sand. If you're standing on sand, you're going to fall. I simply say I think it's wise for people to give credit to those people who gave so much thought to it and their life and sacred honor and risked their lives to accomplish it back then. The idea of just replacing it with a new idea, because there'll be a new idea in 10 years. There'll be another new idea in 20 years. So I think they made it deliberately tough to amend the Constitution, and that was on purpose.
Let's go now to Zachary.
Yeah, my question is, the speaker is referencing the wisdom of the founders and what an immense, the project that they took on and the great successes of it. And they're trying to have foresight and all of those things. And I acknowledge also his point about you can't just have everything be flipping over all the time. You have to have some stability. But I wonder if he is of the opinion that the wisdom of the founders, the logic that they were operating off of, was timeless, in the sense of their concept of rural versus urban. Does rural versus urban, do those terms even apply in the same way today that they did in 1776 or 1780s? You know, the rural landscape is different today than it was then. Slavery was obviously part of the landscape. So the question I have is around, is it timeless? Do you feel like their wisdom had a timeless quality to it?
Obviously not. They intended to have change. They just wanted to make sure that it was slow, very well thought out, and achieved over a 2-year or 6-year period, a 4-year period of time, depending on which body of the government was dealing with it. So that nothing was a rushed, impulsive decision. And of course, they didn't want to have anything like the French Revolution.
Okay. With that, our speaker and questioners are thanked. I want to go to our debrief very soon, but let's get in one more short affirmative and one more short negative. So for that, I would like to grant the floor to Patrick. Patrick, are you still interested in speaking in the affirmative?
Yeah.
All right, you have 2 minutes. And please unmute yourself.
I already did that. Okay. I'm going to read a couple of quotes. When they decided in favor of the Electoral College, it was actually split about 50-50. So it was definitely a compromise. Alexander Hamilton was in favor of it. He said, the Electoral College affords with moral certainty that the office will never fall to the lot of any man who is not in eminent degree endowed with the required qualifications. But 22 years later, Eldridge Gerry created gerrymandering, and that changed everything. So without going into details, just skip ahead here. And in 1826, that's 40 years after the Constitution was created, they made 10 election cycles. Missouri Senator Thomas Hart Benton observed that while the framers had intended electors to be men of superior discernment, virtue, and knowledge, who would select the president free from partisan influence, The Electoral College has failed in its objective in every election. So its failure goes back a long way. And I'd just like to add that that a recent poll that I read, 80% of Democrats are in favor of getting rid of the Electoral College. 80% of Republicans are in favor of keeping it, for what that's worth. That's it.
Okay. Thank you to our speaker. And I will take one question. Anyone wish to ask a question? Seeing none, our speaker is thanked. And I will take one more speech tonight in the negative. Michael, are you still interested in a speech in the negative?
Michael F.
That's right. The floor is yours. You have 2 minutes.
Madam Chair, I would like to speak against the motion that we should abolish the Electoral College, but I would like to argue for reform of the Electoral College because it is my opinion that the current form of the Electoral College is unconstitutional. We assume that the current problems of our presidential selection would be best solved by abolishing the Electoral College and moving to a national popular vote. This is not obvious to me because there is another simpler option. In the Constitution, the Electoral College was designed to be made up of electors chosen in each state who are free to vote for whomever they judge to be the best candidate for the presidency. The electors are to be an ad hoc body that will make judgments on behalf of the people of their state, not the nation, and their judgment is not determined by a popular vote, the will of the state legislature, or any other external determinant. Instead of this, electors today have their votes bound to whichever political party wins the popular vote for electors in that particular state. This, I submit, is unconstitutional. It draws the selection of the presidency closer to being determined by mob rule and has ensured that the presidency becomes a highly fractious, acrimonious contest that divides the nation and the people. In the process, the election over the presidency absorbs nearly 2 years of our electoral calendar and absorbs electoral energy away from down-ballot races. Going to a straight national popular vote would only exacerbate these problems. I would like to see us retain the Electoral College and return it to its constitutional mandate by abolishing the popular vote for president. Electors should be chosen by a lottery in each state and sequestered in the state capitol during the time in which they deliberate amongst themselves and make their selection. They should be presented with a slate of candidates from all political parties, and the electors should not know what the electors of any other state is doing. With a large enough slate of candidates for them to deliberate on, outcomes will be truly uncertain. We should also prevent candidates from campaigning to the electors, instead submitting their candidacy qualifications for their review, much like we do with job interviews. Finally, by eliminating a popular vote altogether, all the concerns about the weighting of votes between states of varying populations are dissolved. Thank you.
Perfect timing. And of course, we end on something where everyone's going to have a question, but I will keep them very, very short. Zachary, if you keep it short, then Kathy can have one.
Michael, the speaker mentioned that candidates wouldn't be able to pitch to the electors. I'm wondering how you make sure that doesn't happen. That seems a very difficult task.
So the model for electors, I think, should be used similar to models in juries, where you can sequester the electors. So candidates would be able to submit videos, resumes, speeches, essays, whatever they want, but those will be submitted to the electors rather than the candidates coming to the electors and campaigning rally style or making a speech directly to the electors. So the vision here is that they go to their respective state capital and they are sequestered for 2 weeks. And during that time, the candidates cannot reach them directly or manipulate them.
All right. And with that, I see a few of you are still waiting. Forgive me. In the interest of time, seeing the lateness of the hour, I am going to look for an appropriate motion to adjourn. Do I have such a motion?
Madam Chair, motion to adjourn.
Do I have a second?
Second.
I second the motion.
Thank you so much. Having moved and seconded, I hereby declare our debate adjourned.